If you want to know how plants and people interact, our speaker, Erika
Galentin.
Galentin is the person to get out with. And now, I'll just read this.
I made it easy on you, Jerry.
Erika is a medical herbalist, certified clinical aromatherapist. She holds a degree in herbal medicine from the University of Wales, United Kingdom, and Scottish School of Herbal Medicine, United Kingdom, a professional member of the National Institute of Medical Herbologists.
Yes, that's
That must be what the MNIMH
that's what funny
is.
letters are, yeah.
And Pi Alpha XI,
Psi.
Pi Alpha Psi, National Honor Society in Horticulture, USA. Several years of clinical practice in Scotland provided the platform for a deep and influential understanding of the efficacy of medicinal plants within a clinical environment. With her passion for medicinal plants native to Ohio and the greater Appalachian region, Erika teaches, lectures, and writes on native medicinal plant conservation and applied ecology, propagation, herbalism, and clinical efficacy. Ta-da!
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. It makes me sound like a rock star. And I'm super honored to be here. Organizations like the Columbus Natural History Society, to me, are a really, really important part of keeping human beings in a loving relationship and a reciprocal relationship with our natural world. And there's loads of different ways that people can connect with the natural world. And what I've discovered over the last 10 years or so is there's this really, I don't know how to explain it. It's this really deep yearning for knowledge about, plants as food, plants as medicine. We can't necessarily call it something or put our fingers on it, but I am always impressed by how, just the average individual is really curious. Well, wow, I can eat that? Wait, that's medicinal? And people really feel very connected to this subject, which I think is great. Because as Jerry said, it's just yet another element, to our interconnectedness, if you will. So, trying to go through the tick list in my head of all the things I wanted to say in my introduction. Okay, so first things first, this presentation is for educational purposes only. Any of the information in this presentation is not intended to diagnose, treat, or prescribe any medical condition. ... If you are interested in trying dietary supplements or medicinal herbs, it's highly recommended that you speak with a qualified healthcare practitioner prior to doing so. Okay, that's the end of that. So one of the things that it's kind of difficult about these kinds of talks, I think, especially we have lots of plants to get through today, and we will get to those plants. But it's really easy for people to want to know, well, what is this herb good for, and what is that herb good for, and what can I use for depression, or what can I use for gallstones? And those are really difficult questions for me to answer. And the reason is it's hard to talk about medicinal plants without actually talking about what herbalism is. And even though this isn't necessarily a wellness presentation or a health presentation, it's really difficult to divorce the two. So what I thought I would do is give a quick spiel about what herbalism is and provide some context for you. So when I go ahead and say, well, this was traditionally used to treat bronchitis, you'll know what I mean. So let's just say, we'll just use bronchitis as an example. I have bronchitis, I go to the doctor diagnoses bronchitis, he then prescribes a pharmaceutical medication that I then take home, and hopefully it cures my bronchitis or alleviates the symptoms of my bronchitis, right? So that is the practice of medicine, right? That's not herbalism. So if I have bronchitis or chronic bronchitis and I go to see an herbalist isn't going to go, oh, well here, take some pleurisy root for your bronchitis. Because that's not what herbalists do. We're not after the information of just what the plant's good for. It's more about who is receiving that plant. And I could have a client, two clients come in with, complaining of chronic bronchitis, and I'm going to support their wellness in two completely different ways. They might leave my clinic with two totally different mixtures of herbs. So herbalism is the focus of wellness on the individual, and we use herbs as it's part of our toolkit. So if that makes any sense, like, does that make sense to everybody? Okay, really great stuff. I'm trying to think what else. I think that's probably it. We should probably just get started. What do you think? Yeah? Okay.
Okay, lights out.
I don't know, can you guys see this okay?
Yeah.
Is this good?
Yeah.
All right. All right. So one of the things that I really love about being a resident of Ohio, especially as an herbalist in Ohio, is that I don't think many people really realize that Ohio used to be the center of reform in medicine in the United States. So back starting in the early 1800s, moving into the late 1900s, but definitely starting in the early 1800s, there was a huge kerfuffle going on between the medical profession itself and the population, right? People were pissed. They did not like doctors. And the reason why they didn't like doctors is because based on their tool set, they were using pretty extreme treatments, things like bloodletting and mercury preparations, lots and lots of opium, which kept their patients happy. But really, and of course they were dealing in that era, they were dealing with a whole bunch of different types of disease, and a lot of it had to do with acute infection and fever. And so it was a different world of illness back then. It was less of the chronic kind of things that we see now in present day. So they were using these really extreme measures, and what ended up happening was that you were more likely to die from the treatment that you were getting from your doctor than you were from the actual disease that you had. I know that might sound sort of familiar, but I think we're going to have this on YouTube, so I better be careful what I say. So anyway, out of all of that, this huge reformation started, and it's now kind of been coined the American Botanical Movement, but it started with a gentleman named Samuel Thompson, who through a variety of interesting experiences ended up in Ohio. And so we have Thomasonian medicine that's actually kind of the beginning of this American Botanical Movement. So Samuel Thompson, he patented all of these formulas, and he had the system for healing people, especially from acute infection and fever. And you could buy his book for $20, and you could become a Thomasonian practitioner of medicine. Now, for a lot of people, that sounds kind of like hokey, a little bit hokey. Oh, I could buy a book for $20 and become a practitioner of medicine. But at the time, there wasn't a lot of regulation of medicine, and what there was, well, slightly bureaucratic, as it is today. So, out of Thomasonian medicine, we see, and this is all happening in Ohio, we see this growth and development into what's called physiomedicalism. And a man by the name of Alva Curtis was kind of a defector from Thompson. He said, well, I don't like you anymore. I'm going to go do my own thing. And so he started a school right here in Columbus. I think I've got a picture. There it is. This is actually after it moved to Cincinnati, but this was the original College of Botanical Medicine right here in Columbus, Ohio. So I think that's pretty cool. And we also have the Lloyd Library and Museum in Cincinnati, who they have collected all of these historical texts from these botanic physicians. And there's the eclectic physicians and the Thomasonian physicians and the physiomedical physicians. And all of these traditions are now housed in this library, which a lot of it's accessible online now too. And the irony is this. So in 1939, the last school of eclectic herbal medicine actually closed. That was the beginning of the pharmaceutical industry. That was the beginning of pharmaceutical medicine. The AMA came in and basically washed out everybody else. And at that turn or at that time, there was this exodus. And what we see is the tradition of eclectic medicine, physiomedicalism, even Thompsonian practice still survives today in the United Kingdom. So in the United Kingdom, as a medical herbalist, I have the right to primary diagnosis. I can diagnose, treat, and prescribe over there. I can't do that here. But what's really interesting is that it took me flying all the way across the ocean to go to the UK to actually recognize the fact that the traditions of herbalism and healing that I was interested in actually started here in the United States, and they started here in Ohio. And I just think that's really amazing. I think a big part of that has to do with the fact that it's such a biodiverse region. You know, I'm thinking about Adams County, you know, I'm thinking about where the glaciers stopped and the amazing biodiversity we see in the foothills of Southeast Ohio. So, you know, it almost makes sense that this is where, you know, the tradition of herbalism that I know really started. So I just wanted to celebrate that with you guys because I just think it's great. And this is just a fun picture. I don't know if you can see what that is, but it's an old apothecary in the Eclectic School of Medicine that was in Cincinnati, so kind of fun. All right, we're getting started. So I guess the other caveat is that, you know, with phylogenetics and all of that fun botany stuff that's going on these days, it's very difficult for me to keep up with who belongs in what family. Is this still the genus? Is this still the species? Things are moving around quite fast. So if any of you happen to notice that I am in error with either family or genus or species, please let me know, because I love to learn new information. Does that make sense? Now, can you guys see that? Yeah. So this is butterfly weed, and you know, herbalists, we call this pleurisy root. Butterfly weed, pleurisy root. Same plant, and so pleurisy is inflammation of the pleura, which is this sac that surrounds your lungs. And when it gets inflamed and you get full of fluid, you can't breathe and you suffocate and you die. It was definitely an issue back before antibiotics and hospitalization and all of these other things. And so this was definitely a traditional eclectic physiomedical remedy for what they diagnosed at the time as a pleurisy, or excessive fluid in the lungs. So in modern practice, in modern clinical practice, I would use something like pleurisy root to support the respiratory system, especially for someone who potentially has just come out of something like pneumonia, or you know, is suffering from a really deep wet asthma, and maybe there's some infection going on there. So it's all about fluid in the lungs and moving gunk and fluid out of the lungs. It can be slightly toxic, so it's used in small doses for short periods of time. Kind of interesting. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, just shout them out and we'll kind of hit them as we go. Sound good? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We all love the coneflowers. So, really interesting story. Is anyone here ever taken echinacea? I mean, it's a pretty, everyone kind of goes, okay, so what do we know about echinacea?
Calms you down. Colds
Colds and flus, right? Yeah. Okay. So this is a really fun learning moment for me. So I used to work for an organization known as United Plant Savers, and echinacea species, and there's quite a few, for example, Pallida, tennesseeensis, and angustifolia, that are on a list that they're concerned about the overharvest of. And what's interesting is that, you know, I say this to people when I say, well, coneflower, purple coneflower, even the purpurea is actually kind of at risk. They look at me and go, but I can buy it at Lowe's. What are you talking about? You know, or, oh, there's all different varieties at Home Depot. But how many of you have ever seen echinacea growing in its native habitat without being planted there by somebody? Quite a few, but not a lot, right? It's kind of a rare sight. And a lot of that loss has to do with this combination that we see when human beings start to learn that they can use these plants, or that these plants have any economic incentive. You have a loss of habitat coupled with an overharvesting, because this plant that's native to North America is now used all over the world for colds and flus, right? And so, you know, between not having enough habitat and being overharvested for now what is basically a global market, it really doesn't have a lot of space left in its wildness, right? And the interesting thing about this is that echinacea, to me, as a clinical herbalist, is the absolute worst thing you could possibly take when you have a cold. You know, I have a cold, I feel really crappy, I'm gonna go to the store and do anything I can to feel better, and here is this product that has been marketed to me to stimulate my immune system. That's gonna make me feel better. And the irony is that that over-the-counter purchase is not necessarily what herbalism is. That's what people think it is, but that's not what it is. Because as herbalists, this is not an herb that I would use at all. In fact, I had a professor that said to me, using echinacea when you have a cold is like shooting the robber and storing his body under the stairs. And what that says to me is that when we have an acute viral infection, the body heats up and it gets it out. It's about sweating, sometimes it's about vomiting or diarrhea, but there's this outward movement of fluids. As the body is heating up and trying to move this sickness out, it's already stimulated. The immune system is already stimulated. So to stimulate it even more is like, metaphorically speaking, you're taking that virus and you're going, oh, and you're trapping it, and the body is going, oh, okay, I'm better now. And it never really gets it out. And this is more of an energetic concept. It's not one that I could prove scientifically, nor have they done any research on it. But they do know that this definitely activates the immune response in a variety of cellular ways. I would like to say, however, that I will show you later a much better, more common remedy for the cold and flu. So I love this herb. I think it's overused for the wrong reasons, and it's deep wound medicine. When you look through Native American ethnobotany, in fact, Jerry brought a copy here. It's also online. And when you look through some of the old eclectic and physiomedical texts, they talk about sepsis. Do you know folks what knows what sepsis is? Okay, so this is like deep, pussy infection, like the nasty stuff, the stuff that kills you, right? And it's warrior medicine, it's wound medicine. So this is something that's gone from, oh, okay, I'm septic, I need echinacea, to, oh, I have a cold, I need echinacea. So it's interesting how that's changed through time, I think. But I'm just going to show you. So there's the angustifolia there, very kind of different form with those real drooping petals. I love that. Can anyone tell me what that, is that a fritillary?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yep.
Okay. Great spangled fritillary. Harvesting seeds from echinacea. Has anyone ever done that?
Yes.
Ouch.
Well, actually, I just kind of leave them there and let the birds eat them and everything else falls and I have this giant patch.
Oh, that's great. I was trying to harvest pallida. I just cut the dried cones off and stuck them in a bag, and so it was literally just a couple months ago, and I'm sitting there going like, oh my gosh, this hurts. These things are so pokey. I love this. I love this plant. It is so gorgeous, especially when you get like a huge patch of it, all the pollinators. And I actually never knew this plant until I moved back to the United States back in 2008. It was kind of, it's been new to me, and I've actually never used it in clinical practice. But I will say there's a couple of plants that in the, again, we're talking about these eclectic and physiomedical physicians that they, instead of doing what the allopaths, what they called the allopaths did, which was using mercury, the allopaths used mercury because they believed it purged the liver, right? So you take all this mercury, it purges the liver, and you purge the liver for a huge variety of reasons. And that action has kind of through time been necessarily kind of whittled down to, it's not something you want to do with force. If you end up purging the liver too much, you can end up with all kinds of interesting catharsis going on many levels. But this plant was used by the physiomedicalists and eclectics in a similar fashion to the way mercury was used, which was to purge the liver. And you would do that in situations where you've got like liver stasis and gallstones or some sort of fatty liver disease, things like that. Very interesting. And you're not supposed to use the fresh root, you're supposed to use the dried root because the fresh root is going to give you a really nasty case of diarrhea. This is another one that I'm always confused about the native status in Ohio. Can anyone tell me about the native status of Passiflora in Ohio? I mean, is it native to Ohio or?
Native one will grow in Ohio, no problem, but the native one is Passiflora lutea.
The lutea. I've never seen that bloom, but that's the one that's got the small kind of.
Smaller leaves, smaller flowers.
Okay.
Governor's Mansion has some.
Yeah. I've seen it in the woods. I've seen the vine. I've never seen the bloom, but.
I got a friend who got it in his greenhouse that takes over the place.
It does take over the place. So this is a wonderful herb, gentle herb, and it has been used for a very long time and continues to be used today, you know, for those of us who have a little bit of extra anxiety going on. And it's affecting how we think, it's affecting how we feel, it's affecting how we sleep, it's maybe affecting our health conditions. So I think passion flower is definitely one of my staple herbs. A lot of my clients get passion flower. I don't know if it's because I happen to attract anxiety states or if it just happens to be that I like recommending this particular herb to people. But it's the flowers and the leaves that are used. And some herbalists kind of look at the flowers as a different medicine than the leaves, and they like to keep them separate. I like to put it all together. But it's a really wonderful remedy for restlessness, anxiety, issues falling asleep and staying asleep. It's quite cooling, it's a very relaxing herb. And it's absolutely gorgeous. And yes, it takes over unless you harvest it continuously. Yeah.
So, I'm a small person, and there are other people here that are much bigger than me. How do you know how much of an herb to take, and how often do you take it versus knowing you take a pill every 6 hours or whatever?
It's a really good question.
How do you determine that?
So that's a really good question. And the way that you as an individual would determine that would be different than the way that I as a clinical practitioner would determine that. And, you know, based on the laws that we have in the United States, if you're going to go get passion flower tea, you know, at the grocery store, which you can get, and I think, you know, even Kroger sells a variety of passion flower tea, or like traditional medicinals, if you've heard of them, they have passion flower in their tea. So basically what you're getting is a very, very, very small amount of herb. That, I mean, their formulas and the way that they formulate, they have to keep everything to certain specifications, and that's going to be based on average body mass index and all of these other factors that they would keep in mind. As an individual researching the use of herbs, one of the best things that I can suggest to you is you look at a variety of sources for information. There's a lot of bad information out there, by the way, about herbs. If you haven't noticed, there's a lot of bad information. And so you find the good information, you learn to ascertain the difference between what's really good information and what's just crap. And you look at those different, what they're recommending. And generally speaking, you know, if your ages, between the ages of, 16 and 50, per se, you know, you're looking at, you know, with a tea between 1 and 2 tablespoons per cup. This is, you know, people think of passion flower as a sedative, right? But it's not a sedative like benzodiazepine, where you're going to take a couple pills and be like, whoa, I feel better. It's not like that. It's not. It's not in your. It's not so much of an active experience. And so, you know, knowing that it's a non-toxic herb, that it's on the GRAS list for the FDA, this is something that's considered to be a food-like substance. You know, you could get away with 1 to 2 tablespoons, and you can play with that. I mean, that's the thing, is that herbs are different than pharmaceuticals in that way. Does that answer your question?
Sort of.
I can try to dive into it a little bit later. Would that be okay?
No, I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
We're talking about something totally different than regular medications.
Right.
And you're talking about utilizing them in kind of a medical way, and so I didn't know if there's a standard.
There is.
Like for somebody like me, I'm going to be 70.
Right.
So, but I'm 5'2".
Right.
And I weigh 105 pounds.
Right.
Well, So where do I fall? in
Well,
that?
so this would be,
That's why I was just
well, this
curious.
is the difficulty with, approaching herbalism and approaching herbs, especially in an over-the-counter environment where you're not working with a clinical practitioner that has taken your case history, that maybe knows the medications that you're taking, the certain conditions that you've had previously and currently, the diet that the foods that you eat, how many bowel movements you have a day. All of the information that we take in as clinical practitioners for the individual is going to be what helps us ascertain the quantity that would be good for you. But when it comes to an herb like passion flower, which is so broad spectrum and gentle, that's not really going to, the difference isn't going to be there necessarily between being set in your 70s and 5'2" or being 25 and 6'4". There may not necessarily be a huge difference there. Now, if I was going to be using something like pleurisy root, like I showed you, then absolutely there would be a difference. And this is part of the problem, especially with herbalism and things like herb-drug interactions, is that people are going to the store and they're taking these over-the-counter things as if they were, pills, and they can end up in trouble because there's not been a consultation, there's not been any education involved in that purchase or that decision. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yay! I love this plant, and it's funny. I work part-time for Companion Plants out of Athens, Ohio. I don't know if you folks are familiar with Companion Plants, but it's a greenhouse nursery that does a whole bunch of medicinal, culinary, native. I mean, there's over 600 varieties of plants, and we grow this. And it's so funny because people, why would you grow pokeweed? It grows everywhere. Who wants that? And I love this plant. My chickens love this plant. They love to eat the berries. And then, of course, this is one that has a lot of traditional use as well in helping to support and stimulate the lymphatic system, which is a big part of our immune response. This is definitely a plant that has been labeled as toxic and poisonous. And so it's interesting to kind of go in and define what toxic and poisonous actually means. Really, when it comes to something like pokeweed, you're going to vomit before you die, right? If you're talking about toxicity here, it's toxic because it's going to make you throw up, often violently throw up, if you take too much. And some people eat the poke leaves, right, like the spring shoots. Has anyone here ever eaten poke before? I have not ventured into eating poke.
They say you boil it,
Jam.
and throw away the water, then you boil it again and throw away the water, and you only eat sprouts of about 4 inches tall.
Right, yeah, like asparagus or something. But it seems like a lot of work for me. And I'd rather let the plant grow and produce all those berries for the birds and, But it's the root, in clinical herbalism, it's the root that's used, the dried root that is used in very, very small quantities to help stimulate the lymphatic system. So cysts, tumors, things like that, pokeweed may be involved in that.
Do they grow about 5 or 6 feet high and have purple berries on them?
Yes.
Okay.
That when they land on your white car, you have stains everywhere. Yeah. Or, the kids come home and they're like, look what I found. And you're like, oh, you didn't eat any of those, did you? And they're just covered in this pink paint. Yeah. Yes, that's what that is. I think it's a glorious plant. It's quite strong in stature, and I don't know. I think it's quite wonderful.
So how would you use it?
So I use this plant by digging up portions of the root system, which is a real treat, let me tell you. And I dry that down to where I'm, maybe about down to about 15% moisture. And then I extract that in alcohol to make a tincture. And then I use like very, very small amounts, very occasionally when needed. So it's quite the process. Making poke tincture is quite the process. Does that answer your question?
For what?
This is, to summarize, I would say that poke is used to stimulate the lymphatic system, or it's thought to support the movement of lymph through the body. When you get sick and you get swollen glands and stuff like that, those are your lymph nodes. And they are a huge part of your immune response. And there would be certain situations that poke may be beneficial to a person who's suffering from immune issues or what we consider to be lymphatic stagnation. which is not something that I could define for you in the short amount of time that I have today. Does that make any sense?
No.
No. I will say that in all of my, in 12 years I've been in clinical practice, I have never once made anyone ever vomit. I have never ever once given anyone diarrhea, and never ever once has anyone ever died in my care. So, I'll just put it out there. Any other questions about poke? Yes?
Lymphedema then would be.
I would say unlikely. Unlikely only because that it tends to be an issue with circulation for a variety of reasons. And poke is more specific to the immune system than it is to the cardiovascular system, supporting the cardiovascular system. So, really, it may not be something that would be used within clinical practice for lymphedema based off of circulatory disease. I'm trying to follow the laws of the United. It's so hard to speak in 2 talks in the U.S. Let me tell you, I got to be careful what I say.
Well, we know you're not prescribing anything.
Good. Yeah, I did make
Well
that
aware
statement,
of it.
didn't I? Okay. So again, that would be, it's an interesting thing to think about, okay, well, what is lymphedema? What causes lymphedema? And how can I support someone who's suffering from circulation issues with herbs, lifestyle, dietary advice, nutritional advice. Can't say dietary advice in Ohio either. That would put me in jail also. Because I am not a licensed dietitian. Know the laws. All right. Moving on. Yay! So this picture, granted, I didn't take this in Ohio, I have to admit. I was in Panthertown Valley in North Carolina. Really cool place. And I was kind of geeking out on this huge patch of the wintergreen because I'd never seen such a huge patch of it. And it was all just bright bloomed. And I'm staring at it, and all of a sudden I hear this. And I was like, uh-oh, don't move. I'm not moving. And of course there was a huge timber rattler, like right next to I'd never seen one before. And it was right next to me, and I had not even seen it because all I was focusing on was the wintergreen. So lesson to me, keep your eyes out for timber rattlers. He seemed really docile. It was just that I was kind of creeping on him a little bit, and he was letting me know, like, can't creep any further. So this is a remedy an herb that has kind of fallen out of use, although you can still purchase it from bulk herb suppliers and stuff like that. But I guess its primary action is really in the urinary system. So it has kind of traditional and modern use as treatment for. Here I said it. I said the word treatment. Support for the urinary system that may, when you may have issues like chronic cystitis and things like that. So has anyone here heard of Uva ursi kinnikinnick? It's another native.
That's usually bearberry.
The bearberry, yes. So bearberry, kinnikinnick, Uva ursi. Gosh, they all have so many names. That one plant has so many names. So that's also used actually quite commercially now in the treatment of cystitis, which is an acute urinary tract infection. And this is kind of has a similar use, traditional modern use. I love seeing this plant. Okay, has anyone ever seen this in the wild?
Yes.
Really? Oh, I'm so jealous.
You mean it's kind of short then?
Yeah.
The northern blue flag is farther north, because most of the
Yeah,
Virginia blue flag is not here.
yeah.
Southern blue flag.
Southern blue
They look
flag.
the same, but they're,
And the southern blue flag, is that the versicolor?
this is versified.
Yeah.
The northern versified.
Oh, the northern is versicolor. Okay. So this is a really popular herb in the United Kingdom. Very, very popular. So it has both traditional and kind of modern use for the treatment of liver conditions that are manifesting as skin problems. That's a really very specific way of saying what the role of iris versicolor is. So, we could say, for example, liver stagnation is causing, liver stagnation, and we're looking at a skin condition like eczema or psoriasis, even acne, adult acne, difficult, tough skin conditions that really don't respond very well to other types of treatment. So it's a real mover, and the idea is that the skin is this huge eliminatory organ, right? So we have all these systems of elimination. The human body is amazing. You know, we have our skin being the largest eliminatory organ, you know, the kidneys, the bowel, the liver is part of that too. I mean, all this gunk that gets filtered through the liver and purged out the bile, or through the bile out the bowel. So really, Blue Flag is thought to help support elimination, especially via the liver. And when that elimination is not taking place, the skin is taking on the extra load. There may be, you know, there may be situations where you end up with eczema or psoriasis or adult acne and things like that. It's a really powerful herb. It can be quite cathartic if given in large enough doses. You know, someone could end up with diarrhea, but like I said, I've never given anyone diarrhea, I swear. But just a really beautiful, gorgeous, gorgeous plant. I really love this plant. Super wonderful. Yay! So, I never knew this existed until I moved to Southeast Ohio. And what's really different about, you know, so everyone knows St. John's wort, right? It's like, okay, so if I were to say on the count of three, tell me what St. John's wort is used for. 1, 2, 3.
Depression.
Aye.
But not with drugs.
Not with drugs, right. Well, and not with a lot of other, not with any pharmaceuticals really, unless you're seeing a clinical practitioner. St. John's wort is in the spotlight for herb-drug interactions. It's thought to be, you know, it's kind of the poster child of herb-drug interactions, and as a clinical practitioner, I've learned a lot about how herbs and drugs interact in the body based off of the research that's come out with St. John's wort. But, you know, you ask an herbalist, what is St. John's wort for? And I'm going to turn around and I'm going to say to you, it's a nervine and an antiviral. I'm not going to say anything about clinical depression. You know, and yes, it definitely has a role in clinical practice for people who are suffering from clinical depression. But again, I don't treat disease, and I certainly don't treat mental health problems. But I tend to use St. John's wort more for issues like shingles. People looking at me like, what? Herpes
I
infection.
just had shingles. What does it do for shingles?
Well, we know that shingles lives in the nervous system, right?
Yes.
And it never goes away. Kind of, it's the herpes thing. So, as well. So, what does St. John's wort do? Well, it's a nervine, or what we call as herbalists a nerve trophic restorative. So it helps rebuild nerve tissue. And that's a very, very cut and dry way of saying that, because it doesn't necessarily really help rebuild nerve tissue, but it definitely supports nerve function, and that's definitely been proven through a lot of different avenues, animal and clinical trials. But it's also a very strong antiviral. So it has kind of both this, I'm an antiviral, which is shingles is a virus, and I'm going to help support the nervous system. So, you know, it's especially when you have shingles and they're painful, and you're using it as a wound healer on the surface, it's also very helpful. So it's interesting because someone found out one day that there's a chemical compound in St. John's wort that seems to have an effect on clinical depression. And it all just, the pharmaceutical industry and the natural products industry just went, woo! And they studied and researched it, and it was called hypericin. And it was like, holy hypericin, it's going to save the world. It's a natural remedy. Everyone's not going to be bummed anymore. And then all of a sudden they go, oh, after a decade of research, it's actually not hypericin that's antidepressant. Maybe it's this one. Maybe it's this chemical compound that's antidepressant. And so now it's hyperforin that's thought to be the antidepressant chemical. And it goes on and on and on and on from there. But really, there's hundreds of plant constituents, hundreds of chemicals in this plant, many of which have not been identified. People don't know how they work. And as herbalists, we kind of recognize the synergy of taking this compound as a whole plant and our body recognizing it as food, and kind of utilizing the parts that it needs.
So it's antiviral, but it's not dangerous?
Well, this can be it's not dangerous in the sense of if I'm not on any pharmaceuticals and I take St. John's wort, am I going to die from it? No. But there's a lot of herb-drug interactions with this particular plant. So if you are on pharmaceuticals, this is definitely not an herb that you should be taking unless you've been speaking to your doctor and another qualified healthcare practitioner that knows something about St. John's wort, because this can speed up the metabolism of drugs, it can slow down the metabolism of drugs, and you can end up with too much in your system or not enough in your system, and the whole thing could go kaputs. So there's a lot of research out there, but not this particular species. Everybody's doing their research on Hypericum perforatum, which is the European variety. And I actually use the native variety here in my clinical practice. I just do. I don't use St. John's wort as an antidepressant. I might use St. John's wort if someone's coming to me with severe anxiety because of the kind of sedative effect it has on the nervous system and the fact that it's able to help repair nerve tissue. I might also suggest St. John's wort both internally and externally for someone who's suffering from herpes or shingles because it has that added antiviral property to it, which at the end of the day is coupled really nicely with the nerve tissue repair. It's an excellent external wound healer, so that's another thing where you've got wounds like herpes or shingles, they're painful, they're sore, they're oozing. It helps heal those wounds up very fast as well, and that's a lot of that's coming from traditional use. So, yeah. Is that helpful? Yes. 2 questions. Sarah, you go.
Spotted St. John's wort, is that the one that you can hold up to the light and see the pimples?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And the European variety also has those. And I with the European variety, you can see they're just around the edge of the margin of the leaf. And then I found with the spotted, they're kind of all mixed in there. But if you roll the leaves, the fresh leaves in your fingers will turn purple. And that's that good stuff that turns bright red in the tincture and the oils and stuff like that.
And that's from the native.
This is native, yeah. So this is kind of, I got to see this as it lives on the edge of woodlands. It's not the full sun-loving European variety. I find it likes those edges. Yes, Jerry?
If you've had chicken pox as a child, does it make you a slight predisposition for shingles as an adult, especially older adult?
That's my understanding of it. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it comes and it goes, but it won't kill you. Right?
Only if it crosses the midline.
What's that?
Only if it crosses the midline.
That's true. All right, so here's a really fun plant. This is a plant that has made me vomit, actually. And I did a stint with the Forest Service, and I remember, I was on a crew with all guys, and I had to kind of keep up with them, and I took a little because I was only girl, and so I decided, well, hey, that's fine. I'm just going to make you all throw up, and so I did. It was a really terrible thing to do, but I really enjoyed it in the moment, I have to say. And they could take it, they were big burly guys. But this is Indian tobacco, so Lobelia inflata. So we have a lot of beautiful lobelias here in Ohio. Definitely know the cardinalis and syphilitica, and then there's, what's the Latin on the pale one? White, flowered.
Tail spike lobelia.
Yeah, that's the one I mean. I've seen it in the woods, but I don't remember the Latin on that. But so this is really the only one that's used in herbalism. Syphilitica and cardinalis definitely have traditional ethnobotanical uses, so like Native American uses. They definitely have uses as well as kind of this early 1800s period that I was talking to you about. But now in modern times, you don't really see Lobelia syphilitica or cardinalis being used very often, if at all. But this particular species, the inflata, it definitely is. One of the most fun things about this plant is that it's got a chemical compound, an alkaloid in it that's very similar to nicotine, known as lobeline. And lobeline, it actually ends up kind of attaching to the same receptor sites as nicotine. And so this is definitely one of those herbs that has a traditional use of being able to help someone get off tobacco. So that's definitely one interesting aspect of it. And when you end up ingesting a lot of this plant, similar to nicotine, it will make you vomit. It can be very emetic. But what's interesting about emetic herbs is that they're very similar to expectorant herbs in the sense that usually if you have an herb that makes you vomit, it will also help you cough stuff up that you need to cough out. And there's this really interesting balance between giving a person just enough to help them breathe more deeply and to expectorate and get that stuff out of their lungs versus giving them too much where they end up like really getting it all out, which is not necessarily what you want to do. So this is something that everyone always asks me, well, can you smoke it? I mean, I've never smoked it. I don't plan on smoking it. But, you know, and I know that there is a history of it being inhaled as a smoke. But I definitely know that in modern herbalism, it's definitely used much more as a tincture, which is an alcoholic extract.
In that photograph, the plant just at the very bottom, is that the lobelia leaf?
Yeah, yep. It's kind of blurry, I'm sorry about that, but yeah. And you can see that it definitely has a resemblance, that rosette right there of leaves definitely has a resemblance to like the blue or the red lobelias. I don't know.
Because I had something called harebells.
Oh,
It looks like that.
doesn't.
The leaf looks like that.
How's everybody doing? Checking in, are we good?
Yeah.
You having a good time?
Yeah.
Thumbs up?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this is another wonderful plant. I like that photo. That's actually in my gardens down in Hockey County. So again, this is another native that I'm always impressed every summer when it comes out and the amount of pollinators that swarm around these plants. I had this amazing hummingbird moth thing happen and it was like I had the Didyma, Monarda didyma over here, and I had the Vistulus over here, and they would just go back and forth, these hummingbird moths all day long. It was amazing. So I really enjoy growing these plants, not only for harvesting and drying, but also because there's such a spectacular show that happens every season when everybody comes out to party with the Monarda. It's pretty amazing. Has anyone ever pinched or smelled the Monarda fistulosa leaves?
Oh, yeah.
What do you get from that?
Oregano.
Oregano. It smells antiseptic, doesn't it? You know what I mean by that? It's like taking like strong thyme or do you know what I mean? Like tea tree oil has that really strong antiseptic smell to it, right? I actually will take little parts of the flower, sometimes whole blooms, and throw them into salads and things like that because they're actually very delicious to eat. And they're spicy. It's a spicy kind of antiseptic flavor, but it's like oregano. It's like a thyme oregano extravaganza. And there's definitely there's a huge amount of traditional and even modern use for this particular plant, but I have to say that I personally love this herb when I have a cold, when I've got, gunk in the lungs, when there's kind of residual chest infection stuff happening, head cold, something to clear out guck. That's the medical word I have to use is guck. Sorry, it's the truth. It's a very good word, guck. Anyway, so this is a really lovely one, and I definitely recommend if you ever see Monarda fistulosa out, especially if it's in an area where you know that hasn't been sprayed, just take one of the tubular flowers off the flower head and just pop it in your mouth and give it a go. It's got you get the nectar, that sweet nectar, along with this oregano, thyme extravaganza. It's really quite amazing. And I like putting flowers in salads. I just love eating flowers in general. And so, this is definitely one that I just put in for a bit of extra flavor. I've never cooked with it as far as like I would cook with thyme or rosemary or oregano. I've never actually cooked with it, but I'd like to try. And I recommend that you folks try as well, just for flavor. It's kind of an interesting one.
Gee,
It makes a great tea, wonderful tea. And it's, for me, it's the flower heads. And I harvest the flower heads when they opened up and after the hummingbird moths have had a chance to kind of get some time with them. So black cohosh. So this is another herb that, again, we talked about United Plant Savers at-risk list. This is another herb that definitely has been over-harvested in the wild. It takes many, many years for it to become sexually reproductive, and its primary mode of reproduction is not vegetative. It is sexual reproduction. And we have a really low germination rate. We're looking at like 30% or less germination rate from the seed. So low germination rate, loss of habitat, requires a long period of time to become reproductively old enough to reproduce.
How many years?
I would say up to 5+ before you're really going to start to get. You might see a flower stalk in like maybe second year, but it takes a while for the plant to really become robust, I think, on a really low germination rate. I mean, I've tried to grow this plant from seed so many times, it's unreal. But of course, this is used all over the world. I would say all over the Western world, at least. So we're talking about the United States and Europe, to treat hot flashes that women get during the menopause transition. And there's a huge amount of research into its efficacy. So a lot of research says, oh yeah, it works great. And then there's another whole load of research that says, no, it doesn't work great. Oh, well, it's safe to take with tamoxifen if you've got breast cancer. Oh no, it's not safe to take. So there's all this conflicting information out there. And it's estrogenic, it has estrogens in it. Oh no, it doesn't have estrogens in it. That's why it doesn't work for hot flushes. And it's this huge dialogue going on in the scientific research community about why this plant works, how this plant works. Because of course there's money to be made. As you can imagine, the market for women trying to traverse the menopause transition and needing support through that transition is huge. Especially when it comes to those nasty sweats that we get. So again, this is definitely an herb that's been over-harvested. It's lost a lot of its habitat. It is now starting to come back. We have a lot of it in the woods in southeast Ohio. This is always one of my favorites to see. And so yes, it definitely has a traditional and modern clinical use as to kind of help support women going through the menopause transition. It's thought to help reduce hot flushes. For some women it does, for some women it doesn't. You can't figure out why it works for some and doesn't work for others. However, it's interesting because now we're turning to research again to see that really a lot of what black cohosh does has to do with the nervous system. So we find that women who are suffering from hot flushes that are actually triggered by anxiety states, that this is a very effective remedy, whereas women who were triggered by hot flushes in non-anxiety states, it's not necessarily a very helpful remedy. But in clinical practice, I use black cohosh predominantly for pain. And this is both male and female, especially joint pain, arthritic joint pain. It's one of my favorite remedies for that. It doesn't work like a painkiller works. It's not your oxycodone, okay, but it definitely has anti-inflammatory and anodyne or pain relieving qualities to it. So it's not one that I necessarily turn to when I have a client who's coming in with menopause, going through the menopause and is having issues getting through the menopause. I don't necessarily just turn to black cohosh, but that's how it's sold over the counter, and that's how people have come to know it. I use it predominantly for pain and joint pain specifically. So, did you have a question, Jerry? No? Okay. Now, is that right? Is the blue cohosh and Berberaceae? It is Berberaceae. Yeah. So, this is the calophyllum. Now, it's called blue cohosh. It looks nothing like black cohosh, and they're not even related. Yes?
The term cohosh is one of the Native American languages for a medicinal plant that's also poisonous.
Okay. And I was always taught that it had something to do with women, but who really knows? so much gets lost in translation, doesn't it? I'm finding. This is a really wonderful herb. I would definitely say, you know, one of the things that happens in herbalism is you get these herbs for men, and then you get these herbs for women. And this would be one of those herbs that I might potentially put in herbs for women category. Black cohosh, a lot of people put in the herbs for women, but I kind of put it in for both, in the spectrum in between, more for joint pain. But blue cohosh has been really, really wonderful. It's known as what's called a partus prepator, so it definitely helps with, you know, women who are going through childbirth and are having a lot of ineffectual, painful contractions. There's a lot of spasm of the uterus, but the baby's not moving out. And that's kind of its traditional use and what it's been used for. I do not recommend using herbs during pregnancy, by the way, unless you've consulted with a qualified medical practitioner. But it's really great. Period pains, cramps, for women who have the wily uterus. It definitely is really wonderful antispasmodic. It definitely has, I think, one of the most common kind of combinations would be, you know, lots of excessive bleeding and pain and spasm and cramp. And again, men don't have to worry about this so much unless, you know, you're partnered with someone who's having issues. But the blue cohosh is really very good for those two things. I just love this because the berries. It's not a very good color up there, but.
I think it's Julie's liver and fall.
It's so beautiful. And to me, there's not a lot of plants. You know, when I'm out in the woods, I mean, the woodland herbs are to me the most my favorite. And I love spending time in the woods. You know, my husband's a tree guy. He works for the Forest Service, so he's always looking up. And I'm an herbalist, and I'm always looking down. And so, you know, between the two of us, we miss each other sometimes there. But I don't think I've ever seen a plant that has quite the hue of green that blue cohosh does. And then you get those blueberries in the fall, and it's a very unique color. When you're looking at the herbaceous layer in the woods, it can be very easy to be like, oh, it's all green. But the more you look at it, I find, the more you look at it, the more you start to see these gentle nuances of color, and you're able to start to recognize plants. Your eye will catch a blue cohosh because that color is there, and it's like, oh, look, there it is over there.
It's purple when it first comes up.
Yeah, yeah,
Deep
deep purple. It's got that creepy
everything but
hand,
the yellow stamens.
the creepy hand that comes out and then goes. So there's the mayapple. I have a hardy patch right outside my home, and I don't know if I'm accurate when I say this, but when I see mayapple, especially in areas that have been highly disturbed, it kind of says to me, and I don't know if I'm right or not, but it kind of says to me that the land is healing again. Does that make sense? You know, I see these areas, especially in Southeast Ohio, with all the coal mining and the deforestation from the bricks and from the iron furnaces, and you have high levels of disturbance, huge disturbance. And some of these areas, it's really obvious that they continually keep on getting more and more disturbed. But then I see mayapples pop up, and I go, okay, it's going to be all right here. There's going to be vitality returning to this land. And I don't know if it's true. I'm not saying that they're like a primary successional species or anything like that, but to me it seems as if it kind of is this way of recognizing that the land is healing. But this is one of those medicinal herbs that's definitely fallen out of use. It can be, it's thought of as to be very highly toxic to the liver. But ironically, it used to be used the way the doctors use mercury. And they use mercury to, like I said before, purge the liver. And the reason why they thought that it purged the liver is that they would give their patients doses of mercury, and their bowels would come out green. And they thought that because the bowels were coming out green, that they were purging the liver of all these bile salts that were stuck in the liver. And then, of course, they decided, okay, well, someone in Europe decided they were going to test that theory, and they did so on dogs, and they found out that, oh, actually, your bowels are green because you're dying, not because it's actually helping to purge liver. That had nothing to do with the liver at all. In fact, that you had green stools because you had mercury in your stools, and that was it. So I think that's kind of interesting. And mercury fell out of practice not long after the Civil War. But instead of using mercury, the eclectic physicians used mayapple. It was their, and podophyllin specifically was a constituent they isolated from this particular root, the root of this plant, and turned it into a preparation that was supposed to have a mercurial-like action in the body and purging the liver.
You use podophyllin to burn warts off your foot.
Uh-huh. Yeah, which makes me feel like I don't want to take it
Nobody wants to
internally.
eat it now.
Yeah, you don't want to eat it.
Except for the right fruit.
Yeah.
And the apple itself.
I mean, I think the deer like them.
No, the apple's fine if it's totally ripe.
Is it?
Yellow,
Yeah,
smells
it's good.
sweet. and,
Have you eaten them?
I have.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I've never met anyone who's
Kinda
eaten them.
like the center of a Concord grape, mild, but a little bit like that, very wet and juicy and seedy.
And this is like fall.
The fruit, well, it won't be fall.
Summer,
they're gone.
high summer.
Critters will eat 'em all.
Yeah.
Yeah, the deer.
Critters eat them.
And you want to wait until they're yellow,
Yellow, sweet smelling,
sweet
soft.
smelling, soft.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely
Don't eat the
right.
skin.
No question about it.
Don't eat the skin.
Yeah.
No,
Is it like persimmon skin where you get that drop? No.
Oh, the skin is poisonous.
yeah, squeeze the stuff out of it.
Okay, so that's what it is. The skin is poisonous.
Don't
This
eat
is
it.
so fun. I can't wait to report back. I'll report back through Jerry. I'll tell him my experiences. I've always been dubious because I've heard so many mixed reports, especially about them being toxic. And I thought, well, let the deer eat them. But then I said, people eat them? Yeah, you can eat them. So this is a really interesting plant, and I think we are probably going to be out of time soon. And like I said, I have this huge list of plants in here. I'm hoping we can get to one more. But real quick, this is a great success story. So there are two plants in the United States that are on the endangered species, the International Endangered Species list, which regulates the trade. And this is called CITES. It's the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species. And there are several appendices within the CITES treaty, which is the same treaty that governs things like rhino horns and elephant tusk. And granted, they're higher up on the appendix list, but golden seal, Hydrastis canadensis, and American ginseng, Panax quinquefolius, are both on the CITES list in Appendix 4, which means that their trade and their export from the United States is highly regulated, and it starts at the state level and works out to the federal level, and then from there, it's the Division of is U.S. Fish and Wildlife that actually manages the CITES species. And the reason why golden seal is on the CITES list is because people went crazy about it and overharvested to almost to the brink. Right. Well, and it's interesting because the success story is that now what went from 90% of, and I'm talking golden seal is available worldwide. Okay, we're talking billions and billions and billions and billions of consumers out there, especially those who thought that they could take golden seal to pass a drug test. Little do they know, they didn't learn their herb-drug interactions, and it probably actually made them fail that test even more. So it's interesting. But so they had the CITES treaty, and golden seals on it due to massive over-harvesting, but it's a real success story in and of itself. And one thing that's really great about golden seal is that it reproduces primarily through its runners underground. And you can leave a tiny little piece of root in the ground and a whole new plant will sprout. And that will vegetatively reproduce until you've got another colony growing again. And so it's able to come back. It's a vigorous plant. It's super easy to grow. And it really does very, very well under agricultural conditions. And so we've gone from 90% being wild harvested to now 90% being cultivated. And really, this plant has come back. And I see it all over the place. And I know that it's now growing all over the place as well. But it's the root that's used, and this is another funny concept for you folks, but it's definitely what we consider to be a mucous membrane tonic. What is a mucous membrane? Well, the mucous membranes basically line the cavities of the body. Anywhere there's a hole coming out of your body, you can guarantee that that cavity is lined with a mucous membrane. In one particular situation, females, not necessarily mucous membranes, but these membranes are the barriers of our external and the external world and the internal world. And sometimes those barriers, through wear and tear and misuse and all the other things that happen through the course of our lives, that net is no longer fortified or strong, and it starts to get these bigger holes in it. And so you end up with kind of some pretty interesting conditions that might have mucous membrane issues involved. And we would use Golden Seal to help tone that back up. It's very, very bitter. Most people don't like the taste. But it's a beautiful plant. Beautiful plant. And there it is. There's the other one. American ginseng. If anyone is interested in American ginseng, I will say that this is a really fun book, The Divine Root. What's really great about American ginseng is that people don't realize that it's ginseng. Like you go to you go and get your Monster drink from the store at the gas station, and it's got ginseng in it, likely to be Korean ginseng. We all know what ginseng is, right? Everyone's like, oh, I know ginseng. You take ginseng for energy or for stamina or for libido. And really, what's weird about this is that 90% of our American ginseng, this is another plant that's having a lot of trouble in the wild. It's definitely being poached. It's considered wildlife. There's significant state and federal laws regarding its harvest. But 90% of the American ginseng is going to China. And guess what? All of their ginseng is coming to us. Right? So, not all of it, but I mean, it's very interesting to me that here we have this herb that we have not been able to steward ourselves. And the reason that, so people think of Daniel Boone, and they think, oh, Daniel Boone made his fortune off the fur trade. But really, Daniel Boone made his fortune off the ginseng trade. Because back in, what's that?
It was a land grab.
Well, yeah. I mean, and it's a very, American ginseng itself is a very, very interesting story. It's a wonderful, wonderful tonic herb. But it's also, having a lot of trouble out there in the wild. So this is one that a lot of, American herbalists don't use, specifically because of its at-risk status. I do use it because I harvest it. I also grow it. I also steward the populations in the wild. So I have a definitely different relationship with American ginseng than many consumers would with ginseng. But it's just an amazing plant. And, some of those roots, I mean, they're long-lived. We're talking 60 years old. There was a root that was dug last season that I saw that was, I think it was like 62 years old. It came out with this really long neck. And you can age it approximately by the leaf scars on the stem. So I can think to myself, at the tender age of 36, that would be another additional 30 some odd years that I would be in the ground in the same place, living there in the same place. It just trips me out. I don't know. I just think it's amazing. And you get these berries on it in the fall that are just gorgeous, and the turkeys love them, and the birds, and so it's a really wonderful tonic herb, definitely for stamina and energy, mental performance, athletic performance, blood sugar balance. There's a whole bunch of clinical research that's gone into American ginseng, so it's definitely a really, really big powerhouse. Okay, so we're at 8:30.
What's the clinical research say about this stuff?
That's what it says. Thumbs up to ginseng.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful plant. Wonderful, wonderful plant. And, I mean, they can't really find anything wrong with it. They're always trying to poo-poo herbal medicine out there, and they've really found some interesting things about it. And, of course, you know, in Chinese medicine, which has been practiced for thousands and thousands of years, has a really strong tradition, respected tradition, current tradition, their ginseng, so their Panax ginseng, is very similar to American ginseng. I mean, Panax quinquefolia, Panax ginseng, same kind of area on the globe. And, you know, I mean, it has a wonderful tonic effect. I mean, they've been using it for thousands of years. So Western medicine is starting to catch up and is starting to do the research because I think, mostly because they think they can make some money off of it. But truth be told, that helps out people like myself who are wanting to be able to justify its use in clinical practice. So, you know, definitely, I mean, it's kind of the man root, it's the heal-all. To be honest with you, I really enjoy American ginseng personally because I play roller derby, and so I usually before a big roller derby bout, when I'm going to be skating around for an hour, getting hit all over the place, I take a little bit of ginseng to help me out. Yeah. So. Yes, Jerry.
What is it about this plant? I've always heard and read that if you try to grow it, its potency decreases.
Yeah. So ginseng reaches max potency at about 6 years. And it's around 5 or 6 years that it becomes reproductive as well. So, you know, when you look at the state laws of the harvest of ginseng, you can only harvest American ginseng from federal lands with a permit or private lands. Can't harvest from state lands. And you can only harvest between the months of September and December. That's after the plant has gone into berry. It has to have 4 prongs on it, which, as you can see, the 5 leaflets is a prong. So this has got 4 prongs on it. That would be a harvestable plant under Ohio State, the state laws here in Ohio. And it's at about 5 years that it becomes reproductive, sexually reproductive, and that's why they have that, it has to be a minimum of 5 years old. And then after that, it's thought to lose its kind of, it's the chemical compounds in ginseng that are thought to have all of the magic are called ginsenosides, and they're steroidal saponins that have a lot of physiological actions in the human body. But what's interesting about it is that after about that 6-year mark, you start to see that ginsenoside content go down and diversify. So you have less of that potency of that one particular compound that then decreases and starts to diversify into other types of compounds. So I tell you what though, if you or I had to live in the ground for 60 plus years, I bet you would be producing some pretty awesome chemicals. Right? I mean, think about that survival strategy. It's pretty amazing. And they're not trees. They're these small little plants. I mean, sometimes they're big, but I've never seen one higher than waist high.
Is it grown commercially?
It is. And one of the problems with American ginseng is that it doesn't do well under commercial cultivation. And so we have, so Wisconsin up into, you know, Canada and the Great Lakes region, but specifically Wisconsin is known for its ginseng growing. And in fact, it's one of the major exporters of American ginseng in the United States. And unfortunately, American ginseng, when grown under agricultural conditions, is highly susceptible to disease. So much so, especially fungal disease. And after you harvest from that particular piece of land that you've grown on, you can't ever plant ginseng there again because it will get sick and die. So you have to constantly be acquiring new land and moving your plots and then using huge amounts of fungicides and pesticides and all kinds of things to make sure that the plants survive. Now, as far as the dietary supplement industry in the United States is concerned, that's contaminated product. I, as an herb supplier, cannot buy ginseng from you if it's been grown with fungicides and pesticides that are going to end up, those residues are going to end up in my dietary supplement. So I'm not going to buy your product. But that doesn't matter because the Chinese will. So Wisconsin sends all of their ginseng full of fungicides and pesticides to China. Well, the thing is that it's not very valuable over there. What's valuable is the wild root. And the more wild, the better. In China, the more wild the root is, the more potent the medicine is thought to be. And the more kind of devoid of human interaction, the more potent that root is supposed to be. And so this is why we're seeing issues with wild harvest of American ginseng, because instead of being worth, $200, or excuse me, less than $200 a pound for cultivated ginseng, you're looking at near on $800 to $1,000 a pound for wild ginseng. That's a huge problem, especially when we have stories like in Ohio where not long ago there was a bust that went down where there was a ginseng dealer who was trading roots for heroin. And so you have a bunch of junkies running around the woods digging up these wild plants. And it's a very interesting story. American ginseng, I mean, I could talk about that alone for an hour and a half. Very complex story, super complex story. And the amount of energy and attention this plant has gotten from humanity through time is pretty mind-blowing. So I would not necessarily recommend American ginseng if you have a heart condition, by the way. Yes. I think we're done.
Yeah, can you wrap up by commenting about the foraging question?
Yeah, I sure can. So when I was taught to harvest either for food or medicine herbs, I was always kind of given this don't take more than 30%, right? And I think that that's a pretty good, if you're good with fractions, I think that that's a pretty good generalization. You never really take more than 30%. But adding to that, I would say that you never take from a non-robust population. You never ever leave a place. You need to make sure that when you leave that space or when you've harvested that material that you can't tell that you were there. And so yeah, maybe it takes you all day to collect or harvest those May apples and squeeze all their goo out. But that's the point, and that part of the actual interaction with that medicine or that plant healing is going to have to do with the amount of commitment you have to going out and finding it and spending the time. And it's difficult because human greed is really, really strong. It's strong in all of us, and we can go and say, hey, I'm going to go harvest for ginseng, and I'm going to be like, I'm going to take every plant I see because I want to make $1,000 a pound, man, right? And there's that element to it, and there's that draw. It's like, oh, I should take as much as I can. I should take more than I need because we always take more than we need, or we use more than we need, or more is better. So I always say, I would err on the side of 20%. Never take more than 20% of what's there. Take from multiple locations. Don't harvest if you're going to be causing significant impact to the ecosystem. For example, if it's really wet in the woods, are you going to be compacting the soil? Are you going to be digging a hole, leaving a huge mess? And always clean up after yourself and make sure that when you leave that space of harvesting that you can't tell that you were there. That's probably the fastest amount of time I've taken to explain wildcrafting.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So just real quick, if you are interested in herbalism and using herbs in the home and with your families, I'm running a 6-week intensive program with the Ohio Herb Education Center that's based in Gahanna, Ohio. We're calling it the Fundamentals of Home Herbalism, where you're kind of going to be learning about basic things like teas and tinctures and vinegars, and kind of just some tonic herbs that you could bring into your home safely. How to work with minor ailments like colds and flus, diarrhea, things like that. And there's going to be classroom time. You're also going to have hands-on practical time where you learn how to make salves and lotions and creams and things. And then you'll also have an online element as well. So there'll be online home learning that you can do as well. So if you're interested, I've got lots of these with me. And I think that's it. If anyone wants my contact information, if you haven't heard me gab enough, I do have cards up here as well. So you can get in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.